All right, welcome back everyone to the Before AGI podcast. Today we're going to be diving deep into a new tool that's making waves in the AI world, Perplexity AI's Deep Research feature.
And it's a really fascinating one.
Yeah, and especially, for all of us, I think all of our listeners are trying to stay ahead of the curve, especially in this rapidly changing field.
Constantly bombarded with information.
Exactly. So we've compiled a bunch of different sources for this videos from great YouTube creators like AI and Tech for Education, Nico AI Ranking, Andy Stapleton, Rob the AI Guy. We also have Grace Loon, News to Pixel, the AI Daily Brief, plus some articles and transcripts, really just trying to get the full picture of how this deep research feature works and why it's getting so much attention.
Right, because it's kind of changing the game in terms of how we research and learn new things, particularly with AI and technology.
Exactly.
So we're going to explore its capabilities, dive into how it actually works,
Yeah.
see what its strengths are, and of course talk about the limitations because every tool has those. So, yeah, think of this as your one-stop shop for understanding Perplexity Deep Research.
Absolutely.
Perplexity Deep Research.
Yeah.
It actually launched, I think, on Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2025.
Oh, wow. Oh,
Which is a kind of an interesting choice for a launch date.
Yeah, giving us the gift of knowledge.
Yeah, that's one way to put it.
Right.
But what they're really trying to do is provide this expert level of analysis by autonomously conducting in-depth research.
Okay.
So instead of just giving you a list of links like a search engine does, it's actually going out there and it's doing the deep dive for you. It's doing the research.
Okay, so then what's the actual process? Like, what does it mean that it's doing research?
So what it's doing is it's performing dozens of searches. I mean, some of the reports we saw were saying hundreds of sources are being read.
Wow.
So yeah, a lot of information is being processed. And then from there, it kind of distills it into a report. But it's not just about retrieving links.
No.
It's actually reading those documents. And this is where it gets really interesting, is that it's iteratively refining its search plan as it learns.
Yeah.
It's almost like, if you can imagine, a human expert sitting down.
Yeah.
And let's say they're researching a new topic.
Mm.
What they would do is they'd start by looking at some general sources, right?
Right.
But then they would follow the threads, they would follow the citations, the references,
Right.
and then they would start to really hone in on the core information, and that's exactly what Perplexity Deep Research is designed to do.
That makes a lot of sense. That's sort of how I end up going down these research rabbit holes sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what makes it so powerful. And then what happens is it goes through this evaluation process, right?
Okay.
And then it synthesizes all this information.
So then what does that look like at the end? What am I actually getting?
Right. So what you're getting is a structured report that is supposed to be super easy to read. It pulls together all the key findings, the insights, and the most important information from the research.
That makes a lot of sense. And then what can I do with that report once I have it?
So once you have the report, you have some options. So you can export it as a PDF.
Okay.
So that's really great for, keeping a record of your research or sharing it with colleagues, collaborators.
Yeah.
And you can also convert it into what Perplexity calls Perplexity pages, which are basically shareable web pages.
Interesting.
So that's a really nice way to, disseminate information, share it with your network.
Okay.
Yeah, make it easily accessible to other people.
So this whole thing sounds really impressive. And I know one of the big things that Perplexity is talking about is this idea of test time compute expansion, or TTC.
Yeah.
So what is that? I mean, I read about it a little bit, but it still seems pretty technical. What's the gist of it?
Right, TTC. It's
Yeah.
kind of a mouthful. And it's a little bit technical, but at its heart, what it's doing is it's emulating the cognitive process of human research. So it's not just, again, about gathering information. It's about understanding it, connecting the dots, and then, like we were saying, refining the search based on what it's already learned. So TTC is really that engine that drives that iterative exploration.
That's really interesting. So it's almost like, I guess, you could think of it like a detective,
Yeah.
Following clues, connecting the dots, and deciding what to look at next.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. I like that.
Right.
Yeah, because it's not just about gathering clues. It's about figuring out which clues are the most important and then following those.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what TTC is enabling deep research to do.
Okay. Now, I also read that deep research, it has both search and coding capabilities.
It's right.
So how does that coding element play into the research process? Why is that important?
Well, in the world of AI and technology, a lot of the information that's out there is not just text, it's code. Right. We have things like GitHub repositories, we have technical documentation, research papers,
Yeah.
and a lot of that contains code snippets.
Okay.
And so by being able to understand code, deep research can actually analyze the structure and to a certain extent, the logic within those documents. So, let's say it's looking at a paper that describes a new AI model.
Okay.
It might be able to read the code snippets that define the model's architecture, and that can give it a deeper understanding of what's actually going on.
Right. So then it can kind of connect the dots between like what's being explained in the text and what's actually happening in the code.
Absolutely.
That's really fascinating.
Yeah, and that allows it to make connections that it might not be able to make if it was just looking at the text.
Okay. And then I know Perplexity claims that deep research can complete most research tasks in under 3 minutes, which, I mean, that just sounds incredibly fast.
Yeah, and that's definitely one of the big selling points, right?
Right.
Because who has time to spend hours and hours researching these days? And, a lot of the reports we saw, a lot of the users were saying that, yeah, they were getting results in, a minute or two.
Wow.
Now, of course, the actual time is going to vary depending on the complexity of the topic, the breadth of what you're researching.
Right.
But it's really designed to get you a quick synthesized overview so you can save a lot of time.
That makes sense. So then let's get into how it actually stacks up against other AI models. I know we were looking at some benchmarks.
Yeah, so, when we're talking about AI, benchmarks are always interesting because it gives you kind of a sense of how capable a model is.
Right.
So in one of the reports we saw, Perplexity highlighted its performance on humanity's last exam, which is like this really challenging benchmark for AI reasoning.
Okay.
And deep research actually scored 21.1% accuracy. Now, you might be thinking, 21%, that doesn't sound that great.
Doesn't sound very high.
Yeah, but the thing is, humanity's last exam is designed to be really hard. It tests multi-step reasoning, really complex concepts. And so even that 21.1% actually puts it ahead of many other models.
Interesting.
Now, the one caveat is OpenAI's deep research model actually did perform better.
Okay.
But, still it shows that deep research is capable of tackling some pretty challenging stuff.
Right. So it's competitive, even though that number doesn't seem super high at first glance.
Yeah, exactly. It shows that it's in the running, right?
Right.
And then on another benchmark, the simple Q&A test, which is, much more straightforward. It's just assessing the AI's ability to answer questions accurately.
Right.
Deep research scored 93.9%.
Wow. Okay, so that's much higher.
Much higher. And again, that outperformed a lot of other models that they compared it against.
Interesting. So it seems like it can handle both the complex stuff and the more straightforward Q&A pretty well.
Yeah, it seems to have a good range.
Okay, so then besides these benchmarks, what are some of the other benefits? Like, what are the practical advantages for someone who might want to start using deep research?
Right. So let's talk about practicality. One of the biggest things is accessibility, right? So Perplexity is offering deep research for free for a limited number of daily queries.
Okay.
We think it's about 5.
Oh, okay.
So you can try it out, see if you like it. And then if you want more, you can go for the Pro subscription, which is about $20 a month.
Okay, not bad at all.
Yeah, I mean, compared to some of the other AI tools out there, that's very reasonable.
Right, especially for a professional who might be using this all the time.
Yeah, or even a student or someone who's, really into learning.
Yeah.
So that's a big plus. Then, of course, we've already talked about speed, right?
Right.
Being able to get comprehensive summaries quickly is just a huge time saver.
It's huge.
And another thing that is really great is that it covers a lot of sources. It's designed to analyze a massive amount of information to give you that really deep dive that we're talking about.
Okay.
And then, we've talked about how it structures the findings in an easy-to-read report.
Yeah.
So you don't have to do all the work of piecing everything together yourself.
Right.
It's kind of like having a research assistant who does all that for you.
Absolutely. It's doing the hard work, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And then another benefit, especially for academics, is that it allows you to prioritize academic sources.
Okay, and why is that so important?
Well, when you're doing research, the credibility of your sources is paramount.
Right.
And so being able to focus on peer-reviewed articles, books, and other academic materials, it just adds a lot of weight to your findings.
It makes a lot of sense. And then the last thing that I think is really interesting is that it actually refines its search as it goes.
That's right.
So it's learning and adapting, which is not something that you see with a lot of other search tools.
Yeah. Yeah, that iterative aspect is what really makes it special. It's not just a one and done kind of search. It's constantly learning and refining.
It's learning more as it's going.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's talk about some of the applications.
Right.
Like, how could someone actually use this in the real world? I know we looked at some really interesting use cases in the sources.
Yeah, so many different applications. One of the coolest ones is optimizing learning. So you can think about, let's say you want to learn about digital marketing, which is a very popular topic these days.
Right.
You can actually ask Deep Research to identify the most up-to-date and authoritative sources.
Okay.
So things like online courses, industry blogs, newsletters, books, podcasts, YouTube channels, even tools.
Wow.
Yeah, and then it can actually synthesize all that into a structured learning plan.
So you could ask it, like, give me a learning plan for digital marketing.
Exactly. And it might even suggest, a logical progression of topics or how much time you should dedicate to each one.
That's really fascinating. So it's almost like having a personalized tutor in a way,
Yeah, like a customized learning roadmap.
Yeah, that's really cool.
And another really powerful application is analyzing public sentiment. So let's say there's a new AI model that comes out.
Okay.
Something like, and there's a specific example of this, DeepSeek.
Okay.
You could use Deep Research to analyze how the public is reacting to this new model.
So like what people are saying on social media.
Exactly. Social media, user reviews, expert commentary.
Right.
You can get a sense of, are people excited about it? Are they worried about it?
Are there any risks? Yeah.
Yeah, what are the potential benefits? And in some of the examples, it actually gave percentages. Like it said, 38.8% of Twitter mentions about DeepSeek were positive.
Wow. So it could break it down even further.
Yeah, so you get a really good overview of the sentiment around a particular topic.
That's really interesting. So it's not just like, oh, people are saying this. It's actually giving you more quantitative data as well.
Yeah, a more data-driven approach to understanding public opinion.
Okay. So I could see that being really valuable for businesses.
Absolutely.
Right, for market research and things like that.
Market research, product development, understanding, how your brand is perceived, all sorts of things.
Absolutely. Okay, what about staying on top of trends and news?
Yeah, that's another big one.
Right, because things are moving so fast, especially in the AI world.
It's crazy. And so one of the things you can do with Deep Research is, let's say you want to stay up to date on, all the latest in AI. You can ask it to analyze all the recent AI tools,
Okay.
the innovations, the news, and then it can actually pinpoint emerging trends.
Okay.
So, for example, one of the things that it identified was this, open source revolution that's happening in AI.
Okay.
And specifically with DeepSeek, that was one of the things that it was able to surface. And another trend that it highlighted was this rise of autonomous AI agents, which is something we're going to be talking a lot about in the future, I'm sure. So it's kind of like your AI-powered news filter.
Right, so you could use it to stay on top of your specific niche.
Exactly. You don't have to wade through all the noise.
Right.
You can just get the stuff that's most relevant to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then for people who are in content creation or SEO, search engine optimization.
Okay, yeah, that's a big one.
Huge,
Right.
right? Deep Research is actually, it's pretty incredible what you can do with it. You can actually use it to generate the foundation for blog posts, articles.
Interesting.
Yeah, so, you do your research with Deep Research, and then you can actually export that as a PDF.
Okay.
And then some people are even using other AI models to further refine the content, adding their own personal experiences, their own perspectives. And it really helps, to create something that's more unique, that's more likely to rank well.
Right, so it can kind of streamline the whole process.
Absolutely.
Of coming up with ideas, doing the research.
Yeah. And even, there was even one example of like using negative keywords to refine the tone and style.
Interesting.
Yeah, so you can really get granular with it. And then for academics, it can be a real time saver for doing literature reviews.
Right.
Writing introductions for research papers, because again, it can prioritize academic sources so you're getting the good stuff.
Right, so it's saving you potentially hours and hours of like manually searching through databases.
Yeah, and that's huge, right? Because time is precious, especially for academics.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, we talked about using it for practical things. So you can research the Florida fog phenomenon, which is a weird one.
That is a weird one.
Yeah, that popped up in one of the videos. Or you can stay updated on AI news if you're a content creator, which, that's our world.
Exactly.
You can use it to analyze reviews to figure out which air fryer you should buy.
Right.
You can create travel itineraries. It really is a very versatile tool.
So it seems like it's got a lot of potential, a lot of different applications.
Absolutely.
But are there any downsides? Are there any limitations that people should be aware of?
Yeah, no tool is perfect. Right?
Okay.
So it's important to be aware of the limitations. One thing is that when it comes to really deep analytical tasks,
Okay.
the kind of things that require a lot of inferential reasoning,
Right.
it might not be quite as good as some of the really top tier models.
Okay, like GPT-4.
Yeah, like GPT-4 or Anthropic's model. And that's mainly because of the underlying reasoning power of those models is just immense.
Right.
So, for certain tasks, it might be better to go with one of those more advanced tools. And another thing is that it can be, sometimes it can be a little bit too reliant on sources that might not be the most reliable.
Okay.
So one user mentioned that, when the social mode is enabled, it tends to rely a lot on Reddit. And Reddit, it can be a great source of information, but it can also be a little bit, it can be unreliable sometimes.
Right, right. And it could be a little biased depending on the subreddit.
Exactly. So it's always good to double check the sources that it's using, make sure that they're credible. And, one other thing is that the initial output or context window might be smaller than some other tools.
Okay.
So what that means is that the initial report might not be as exhaustive as you might hope.
Gotcha.
And there's also the potential for what we call hallucinations, which is where the AI generates information that's not actually backed up by the sources.
Right. And we see that with a lot of large language models.
Yeah. And Perplexity is trying to minimize that.
Okay.
But it's something to be aware of.
Right, because you don't want to take everything as gospel truth.
Exactly.
Right.
You always have to apply your own critical thinking.
Absolutely.
And, like any AI, it can struggle with nuanced requests.
Okay.
Like if you're asking something that's very specific or very subtle, it might not quite understand what you're looking for.
Right. It might not pick up on the nuances.
Yeah. And then one other thing is that in academic writing, sometimes it doesn't consistently provide citations, especially in shorter pieces.
Okay.
So that's something to keep in mind if you're using it for academic purposes. And then finally, all large language models, they're trained on massive amounts of data, and that data can contain biases.
Of course.
So it's just something to be aware of that, the output of deep research could potentially reflect some of those biases.
Right. So it's not a perfect objective tool, but it's something that we need to be aware of when we're using it.
Exactly.
So then what are some strategies that we can use to make sure that we're getting the most out of deep research?
Well, first of all, you always want to start with a clear, specific query. The more focused you are in your prompt, the better the results are going to be.
Yeah.
And make use of those focus modes, those web, academic, social.
Right.
They're there for a reason, They
Right.
help to guide the search towards the right kind of sources.
Exactly.
Don't hesitate to ask follow-up questions, The more you interact with it, the more you refine your understanding.
Right.
And this is really important. Always verify the information.
Absolutely.
Don't just take it at face value. Go back, check the sources, cross-reference with other reliable information.
Right.
It's really about treating deep research as a powerful assistant, but not the ultimate authority.
Gotcha.
You still have to do your own due diligence.
Absolutely.
And providing sufficient context in your prompts can also help. The more information you give it, the better it can understand your intent.
Mm-hmm.
And then for certain tasks, especially those that require very precise reasoning, you might still want to consider Perplexity's standard pro search or even another specialized tool.
Right.
It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. And definitely use those export features, save your research, share it with others.
Right.
And then that iterative approach that we were talking about, refine your queries based on the initial results.
Right.
That can really help to improve the quality of your findings. And always keep those biases in mind, For complex questions, it might be better to break them down into smaller, more manageable queries.
Okay.
And, some people even find it helpful to use other AI models to help them plan their research strategy.
Really?
Yeah, and then use deep research kind of as the execution engine.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways to use it.
Okay. So then how does deep research compare to other AI research tools that are out there, like OpenAI's deep research or Google's Gemini?
Well, when you compare it to OpenAI's deep research, Perplexity definitely has the edge when it comes to accessibility and cost.
Okay.
That free tier, the more affordable pro subscription,
Right.
it just makes it much more accessible to a wider range of people.
Yeah.
Now, some users have suggested that OpenAI's models might be a little bit better when it comes to raw analytical power. They're just incredibly powerful models.
Right.
But Perplexity is really fast,
Okay.
and it's more budget-friendly, which is a big consideration for a lot of people.
Absolutely.
Google's strength is always in its integration with its ecosystem.
Right.
Right? I mean, they have so many different tools and services, and so they're able to kind of weave everything together seamlessly.
Yeah.
So each tool has its own strengths and weaknesses.
It makes sense. So then overall, what are your final thoughts on Perplexity Deep Research?
I think it's a really impressive tool. It has the potential to revolutionize the way that we approach research and learning, and particularly in a field like AI, where things are moving so quickly.
Yeah.
Being able to quickly synthesize information from all these different sources is just invaluable.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I'm excited to see how it evolves.
Me too. I'm really excited to see how it's used, in the coming months and years.
Yeah.
And it's definitely something that I'm going to be continuing to experiment with myself.
Absolutely.
So I encourage all of our listeners, go check it out.
Give it a try.
Play around with it, see what it can do for you.
Yeah, and let us know what you think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Leave a comment, send us an email. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Absolutely. And for more deep dives into the world of AI, make sure to subscribe to the Before AGI podcast. And if you're looking for more hands-on AI tutorials and insights, be sure to check out my YouTube channel, Ian Ochieng AI.
Absolutely.
Thanks for diving deep with us.
See you in the next one.